They were selling a widow and her baby at an auction. The alpha vampire came and said, "I'll buy them." The iron chains around Selina's wrists felt heavier every minute. She held her 3-month-old son, Liam, closer to her chest. His tiny fists grabbed her torn cotton dress. The baby's soft cries filled the underground room, mixing with the disgusting laughter of the creatures gathered below. "Don't cry, sweetheart," she whispered against his blonde hair. The same golden color as his father's had been. "Mommy's here. Mommy won't let anything happen to you." But even as she said the words, Selina knew they might not be true. She was about to be sold like an animal, and there wasn't anything she could do about it. The red auction house stretched beneath the city like a grave. Dim red lights cast scary shadows on the stone walls that had witnessed many terrible things. The air smelled of blood, fear, and something else, something old and dangerous that made Selina's skin crawl. "Next up, we have a real treat," the auctioneer's voice boomed through the room. Harold Grimm was a sneaky man, barely 5 feet tall with greasy black hair and yellow teeth. He served his vampire masters with disturbing excitement, trading human lives for gold coins. A young widow, 22 years old, and her infant son. The crowd made excited sounds. Vampires of all kinds filled the stone benches. Some looked fancy in expensive suits. Others looked like walking nightmares with glowing red eyes and long fangs. But they all had the same hungry look as they stared at Selina. "Look at that smooth skin," Grimm pointed toward her with his wooden cane. "That golden hair. She's pure American, folks. And the baby, well, children are such rare treats these days." Selina's stomach twisted. She forced herself to stay standing even though her legs were shaking. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a happy wife living in the human settlements outside Chicago. Then the raiders came. They killed her husband, Marcus, in front of her, burned their small house to the ground, and dragged her here to be sold. "The bidding starts at 500 blood coins," Grimm announced. A vampire with silver hair and a red cloak raised his hand. 1,000,000, 500, called another from the back row. 2,000, this voice belonged to a female vampire with midnight black hair and mean green eyes. She licked her lips as she stared at little Liam. "I haven't tasted baby blood in decades." Selina's protective instincts kicked in. She may be chained. She may be helpless, but she'd die before letting anyone hurt her son. "Stay away from him," she shouted, pulling Liam even tighter against her. The vampires laughed at her, finding her fear amusing. 3,000, shouted a huge vampire with scars covering his face. 4,000, 5,000. The bidding war got worse. Selina watched in horror as her and Liam's fate was decided by creatures who saw them as nothing more than food or entertainment. Some vampires openly talked about their plans, using her as a personal blood source, training Liam as a servant, or worse. 8,000 blood coins, screamed the black-haired female vampire. Her eyes had turned completely red now, showing her true hunger. The room fell into a short quiet. 8,000 was a fortune, even for vampire nobility. Most of the bidders shook their heads and sat back down. 8,000 going once, Grimm called out, clearly happy with the price. Going twice. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room slammed open with so much force that they cracked against the stone walls. The sound echoed through the auction house like thunder. Every vampire in the room went completely silent. Even Grimm's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence. A figure stepped through the doorway, and Selina felt the temperature in the room drop by 20 degrees. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his black leather coat. His hair was dark as midnight, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. But it was his eyes that made Selina's breath catch in her throat. They were the deepest blue she'd ever seen, like the ocean during a storm. And they held centuries of power and pain in Victor Drawl. Even Selina, isolated in her human settlement, had heard whispers of his name, the alpha vampire, the immortal king. The most feared creature in all of North America. His footsteps echoed through the silent room as he walked down the center aisle. Other vampires pressed themselves back against their seats, none daring to meet his gaze. The air itself seemed to bend around him, thick with ancient power that made Selina's skin tingle. He stopped directly in front of the auction stage and looked up at her. For a moment, their eyes met across the space between them. Selina expected to see cruelty or hunger, but instead found something that confused her, a flicker of recognition. Almost like sadness. "My lord, Victor," Grimm stammered. bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the stage. We didn't expect you tonight. Is there something specific you're looking for?" Victor's gaze never left Selina's face. When he spoke, his voice was deep and smooth with just a hint of an old-world accent that suggested centuries of existence. "What's the current bid?" 8,000 blood coins, my lord. Lady Evangeline, there was just about to, I'll take them." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lady Evangeline, the black-haired vampire who'd been winning the bidding war, opened her mouth to protest. But when Victor's head turned slightly in her direction, she immediately closed it again and sank back into her seat. "But my lord," Grimm said carefully. "The proper bidding process," I said, "I'll take them." Victor's voice didn't rise, but something in his tone made every vampire in the room flinch. "Is there a problem with that?" Grimm shook his head so quickly it looked painful. "No, my lord. Of course not. They're yours." Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with coins. He tossed it onto the stage, where it landed with a heavy thud. 50,000 blood coins. That should cover any inconvenience. Gasps echoed through the room. 50,000 was more than most vampires saw in a century. "Release them," Victor commanded. Grimm fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked Selina's chains. The moment they fell away, she rubbed her raw wrists and held Liam even closer. Victor climbed onto the stage with fluid, inhuman grace. Up close, he was even more impressive. The leather of his coat creaked as he moved, and Selina could see old scars on his hands that spoke of countless battles. "Can you walk?" he asked her, his voice surprisingly gentle. Selina nodded, not trusting her voice. She was terrified, but something about his presence felt different from the other vampires. He wasn't looking at her like she was prey. "Then come. We're leaving." He turned and walked back down the aisle, clearly expecting her to follow. Selina glanced around the room at all the disappointed faces, then down at Liam, who had stopped crying and was staring up at the mysterious vampire with curious baby eyes. She had no choice. Whatever Victor Drawl wanted with them, it had to be better than becoming Lady Evangeline's dinner. Taking a deep breath, Selina followed the alpha vampire out of the auction house and into an uncertain future. The night air hit Selina's face like a cold slap as they came out from the underground auction house. Above them, the Chicago skyline glowed with electric lights, a stark contrast to the medieval horror they just escaped. Victor's black limousine waited at the curb, its engine purring like a sleeping predator. Two vampire guards stood by the vehicle, tall, pale men in dark suits with eyes that glowed amber in the streetlight. They bowed deeply as Victor approached. "My lord," one of them said in a thick Eastern European accent. "Everything is prepared." Victor nodded and opened the rear door himself. He gestured for Selina to get in, his movements surprisingly polite for someone who just bought her like livestock. Selina hesitated. Once she got in that car, there would be no going back. But what choice did she have? Liam whimpered in her arms and she realized he was probably hungry. She hadn't been able to feed him properly since their capture. "Please," Victor said, and something in his tone made her look up at him. His storm blue eyes held an expression she couldn't quite read. "I give you my word. No harm will come to either of you under my protection." There was something about the way he said, "my word," that felt important, ancient, like it carried weight beyond normal promises. Selina climbed into the fancy interior, sinking into leather seats softer than anything she'd ever felt. Victor settled across from her, careful to keep his distance. The guards took their positions in the front seats, and the limousine glided silently through the empty streets. "Where are you taking us?" Selina finally found her voice. "Home," Victor replied simply. "My castle is about an hour north of the city." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why did you pay so much for us? What do you want?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light of the car's interior. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "Someone I lost a very long time ago." The mysterious answer only made Selina more nervous. She shifted Liam to her other arm, and the baby made a small sound of discomfort. "He's hungry," Victor observed. "I haven't been able to feed him properly," Selina admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and anger. Those monsters didn't exactly provide baby formula. Without a word, Victor pressed a button on the car's console. "Marcus," he said to one of the guards, "call ahead to the castle. Have them prepare a nursery with everything an infant needs." "Formula?" Clothes, toys, everything. Yes, my lord. Selina stared at him in shock. You're helping him? I told you, you're both under my protection now. That means your needs will be met. Victor's expression softened slightly as he looked at Liam. What's his name? Liam, she whispered. His name is Liam. Liam, Victor repeated, and something flickered across his face, pain maybe, or memory. It's a good name. As they drove through the night, Selina found herself studying her captor. Because that's what he was, wasn't he? He might be kinder than the vampires at the auction, but she was still bought and paid for, still owned. Yet something didn't add up. The way he looked at Liam wasn't scary. If anything, it was almost protective. And 50,000 blood coins, that was an insane amount of money. What could possibly be worth that much to him? My husband, she said suddenly. Marcus. Did you know him? Victor went very still. Why do you ask? Because you keep looking at me like you recognize me. And you said I remind you of someone you lost. Selina's voice grew stronger as her suspicions became clearer. The raiders who killed Marcus weren't random, were they? They were looking for something specific. Your husband was involved in things he shouldn't have been, Victor said carefully. Things that got him killed. What kind of things? Before Victor could answer, the limousine turned through massive iron gates topped with spikes. Ahead of them rose a structure that took Selina's breath away, a genuine medieval castle complete with towers and battlements. As if it had been lifted from the European countryside and dropped into the Illinois wilderness. Welcome to Ravencroft Castle, Victor said as they pulled up to the main entrance. Your new home. The word home sent a chill down Selina's spine. I'm a prisoner here, aren't I? Victor met her gaze directly. You're under my protection. There's a difference. And if I want to leave? Then you'd die within hours. His voice was matter-of-fact, not threatening. There are things in this world that want you and your son dead, Selina. Things you don't understand yet. Here you're safe. The car stopped, and Victor stepped out. He turned back to help her, offering his hand like a gentleman. Selina found herself accepting it, feeling the cold strength in his fingers. As they walked toward the castle's entrance, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Guards were stationed everywhere. Not just regular vampires, but elite warriors in full armor carrying weapons she didn't recognize. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. What aren't you telling me? She demanded as they reached the massive wooden doors. Victor paused, his hand on the iron handle. When he looked at her, his expression was filled with centuries of regret. Your husband didn't die in a random raid, Selina. He was part of a rebellion that cost me everything I ever loved. And now, whether you like it or not, you and Liam are the only family I have left. The door swung open, revealing a grand hall lit by hundreds of candles, but Selina barely saw it. Victor's words echoed in her mind as the full weight of her situation became clear. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a replacement for something or someone Victor had lost. And little Liam might be in more danger than she'd ever imagined. The interior of Ravencroft Castle was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Massive stone columns supported high ceilings painted with scenes of ancient battles between vampires and humans. Tapestries showing bloody conquests hung from the walls. And the air carried the scent of old leather, burning candles. And something metallic that Selina tried not to think about. This way, Victor said, guiding her through hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced vampires. Their painted eyes seemed to follow Selina as she passed. Judging this human intruder in their sacred space, they entered what appeared to be a grand dining hall where at least 30 vampires sat around an enormous mahogany table. The conversation died instantly when Victor appeared with Selina and Liam. My lord, said an elderly vampire with silver hair and a monocle. We weren't expecting guests. Lord Blackwood, Victor acknowledged with a nod. Allow me to introduce Selina and her son Liam. They are under my personal protection and will be living here permanently. The silence that followed was deafening. Selina could feel dozens of pairs of hungry eyes studying her, figuring out her worth, measuring her weaknesses. Some looked hungry. Others looked disgusted. A vampire near the end of the table, a thin man with a pointed beard, spoke up. My lord, surely you don't mean to keep livestock in the main castle. Victor's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Did I stutter, Lord Ashford? No, my lord, but, then there's nothing more to discuss. Victor's voice carried absolute authority. Anyone who has a problem with my decision is welcome to voice it directly to me, privately. Lord Ashford's face went pale, well, paler than usual, and he quickly looked down at his goblet of blood. That's when she appeared. A woman glided into the hall from a side entrance, moving with the fluid grace that only centuries of vampire existence could provide. She was stunning in the way that supernatural creatures often were, tall and thin with platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves to her waist. Her dress was deep red silk that hugged every curve, and diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. But it was her eyes that made Selina instinctively step closer to Victor. They were ice blue, beautiful, and absolutely merciless. "Victor, darling," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight British accent. "What an interesting surprise." "Lady Seraphine," Victor replied coolly. "I wasn't aware you were attending tonight's gathering." Lady Seraphine's gaze swept over Selina with unconcealed disgust. "Well, I simply had to see for myself. The rumors are flying through the court. Our mighty alpha vampire has purchased a human breeding pair like some common merchant." Several vampires at the table shifted uncomfortably. Even Selina, with her limited knowledge of vampire society, could tell this was a dangerous moment. "Watch your tongue," Victor warned, his voice deadly quiet, but Seraphine wasn't finished. She circled around Selina like a predator sizing up prey. "She's pretty enough, I suppose, in that calm mortal way. Though I can't imagine what use you'd have for the infant. Surely not as a meal. Babies are so small." Liam chose that moment to fuss, making small crying sounds against Selina's shoulder. The sound seemed to cut through Victor like a blade. "That's enough," he said, stepping protectively in front of Selina. "You will show them respect or you will leave my castle." Seraphine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your castle? How fascinating. I seem to remember when you couldn't make a decision without consulting the council. When you valued the opinion of your peers." Her eyes narrowed. "When you valued my opinion." The other vampires were watching this exchange with the fascination of spectators at a gladiator match. Selina realized she was witnessing something important, a power struggle that had been building for who knew how long. "Those days are over," Victor said simply. "Are they?" Seraphine moved closer to him, close enough that her perfume, expensive and overpowering, filled the air. "You've grown soft, Victor. Centuries ago, you would have drained these humans dry without a second thought. Now you're playing house with them." I said, "That's enough." But Seraphine pressed on, her voice rising. "The court whispers that you've lost your edge. That the great Victor Drawl has gone weak over a dead human woman from decades past, and now you're trying to replace her with this peasant." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. For a split second, his carefully controlled mask slipped and Selina saw raw pain flash across his features. That's when Seraphine made her mistake. She reached out as if to touch Victor's face in mock sympathy. "Poor darling. Still mourning your lost little." Victor's hand shot out faster than human eyes could follow, catching Seraphine's wrist in a grip that made her gasp. "You will not speak of her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow more terrifying than any shout. "And you will not touch me." For the first time, fear flickered in Seraphine's eyes. But she quickly masked it with anger. "The council will hear about this," she hissed. "About your weakness, about these humans corrupting your judgment. Let them." Victor released her wrist and turned back to Selina. "Come, let me show you to your rooms." As they left the dining hall, Selina could hear the immediate explosion of whispered conversations behind them. But what stuck with her was the look of pure hatred Seraphine had given her, a look that promised this was far from over. "She's dangerous," Selina said quietly as they climbed a spiral staircase. "Yes," Victor replied without looking back. "She is. And she was in love with you." Victor paused on the steps. "Seraphine has never loved anyone but herself. What she felt for me was possession, not love." They reached a beautifully decorated bedroom with an attached nursery. Everything Liam could possibly need had been arranged: a crib, changing table, clothes, toys, and bottles of formula. "Thank you," Selina said softly, settling Liam in the crib. He immediately quieted, exhausted from the night's events. Victor lingered in the doorway. "Selina," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "What Seraphine said about replacing someone, she wasn't entirely wrong. But it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Victor looked at sleeping Liam, and that strange tenderness crossed his face again. Sometimes the universe gives us a second chance to protect the people we failed before. I won't fail again. With that mysterious statement, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Selena alone with more questions than answers. And the growing certainty that she'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple rescue. 3 days had passed since Selena's arrival at Ravencroft Castle, and she was beginning to understand the delicate balance of power that existed within its walls. During the day, when most vampires slept, she was free to explore with Liam. The castle staff, a mix of human servants and loyal vampires, treated her with cautious respect, clearly following Victor's orders. But at night, when the court came alive, she felt the weight of dozens of hostile stares. Whispered conversations stopped when she entered a room. Vampires would bare their fangs in what could barely be called smiles. The message was clear. She didn't belong here. Victor had been absent for most of those 3 days, handling what his assistant called territorial disputes in the northern regions. Selena found herself missing his protective presence more than she cared to admit. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the Feast of the Blood Moon, a monthly celebration where the entire vampire court gathered in the Great Hall for an elaborate dinner. Victor had returned just before sunset, looking exhausted but determined to maintain normalcy. "You don't have to attend," he told Selena as she fed Liam in the nursery. "It might be safer if you stayed here." But Selena had spent 3 days hiding in her rooms like a frightened mouse. She was tired of being afraid. "I'm going," she'd said firmly. "If I'm going to live here, I need to show them I'm not going to cower." Victor had studied her for a long moment, then nodded with what might have been approval. "Very well. But stay close to me." Now, sitting at Victor's right hand at the high table, Selena watched the vampire court feast on goblets of blood while she picked at a plate of actual food. The contrast was unsettling, elegant creatures in silk and velvet, discussing art and politics while consuming what had once flowed through human veins. Liam slept peacefully in a portable crib beside her chair, seemingly unaffected by the supernatural energy that filled the room. Several vampires had commented on how unusual it was for a human infant to be so calm around their kind. "Most babies scream in our presence," Lord Blackwood had observed earlier. "Something about their natural instincts warning them of predators." "Perhaps this one knows he's protected," Victor had replied, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Lady Seraphine sat halfway down the table, looking stunning in a black gown that seemed to absorb light. She'd been shooting poisonous glances at Selena all evening, but had kept her comments to herself for now. The feast was reaching its peak when the first crossbow bolt shattered a stained glass window. Chaos erupted instantly. Dark-clothed figures rappelled through the broken windows, landing with inhuman grace among the startled court. They moved with vampire speed and precision, but Selena caught glimpses of their faces beneath black masks. These weren't vampires. They were humans. Enhanced humans moving with the fluid efficiency of trained killers. "Assassins," someone screamed. The attackers ignored the other vampires, their focus laser-sharp on a single target, Selena and Liam. Victor was on his feet in an instant, his civilized mask falling away to reveal the top predator beneath. His eyes blazed red as ancient fangs extended. And when he roared a challenge, the sound shook dust from the ceiling. 3 assassins came at Selena at the same time. She grabbed Liam from his crib and dove behind her chair just as a silver blade whistled through the air where her head had been. "The woman and child," one of the assassins shouted. "Forget the others." Victor moved like lightning, blocking the first assassin before he could reach Selena. The vampire's clawed hand punched through the man's chest with a wet sound, lifting him off his feet before hurling him across the room. But more assassins kept coming. They poured through the windows like a coordinated military strike, armed with weapons Selena recognized: silver bullets, wooden stakes, crossbows loaded with blessed bolts. These weren't random killers. They knew exactly how to hunt vampires, and somehow they knew exactly where to find her. "Victor!" Selena screamed as another assassin lunged at her with a curved dagger. She rolled away, clutching Liam protectively, but she was only human. She couldn't fight these enhanced killers. Victor appeared beside her like an avenging angel, catching the assassin's wrist and twisting until bones snapped. The dagger clattered to the floor as Victor's other hand closed around the man's throat. "Who sent you?" Victor demanded, his voice a barely controlled snarl. The assassin laughed, blood frothing at his lips. "You think you can keep them safe? She's marked for death, bloodsucker. The child too." "By whom?" But the assassin bit down on something hidden in his mouth. Foam erupted from his lips and he shook once before going limp. Poison capsule. These killers were serious professionals. Around them, the battle raged. The vampire court had recovered from their initial shock and were systematically destroying the remaining assassins. But the damage was done. Tables were overturned. Blood, both red and black, stained the ancient stones. And the message was clear. Nowhere was safe. Victor released the dead assassin and turned to Selena, his hands gentle despite the violence he'd just unleashed. "Are you hurt?" "No, we're okay," she gasped, checking Liam frantically. The baby was crying but unharmed. "Victor, they knew. They knew exactly where to find us." "Yes." Victor's expression was grim as he looked around at the destruction. This was planned, coordinated. His gaze swept over the assembled court, many of whom were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. That's when Lord Ashford stepped forward, his pointed beard quivering with anger. "My lord, surely you see now how dangerous it is to harbor these humans. They've brought death to our very halls." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the court. Even some of Victor's supporters looked uncertain, but Victor's response cut through the doubts like a blade. "The only danger here is the traitor who told them where to strike." His red eyes swept over every face in the room. Someone in this court gave those assassins information. Someone here wanted Selena and Liam dead. The implications hung heavy in the air. Lady Seraphine's face had gone pale, paler than usual, and Selena noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Post guards at every entrance," Victor commanded. "No one leaves the castle until I find out who betrayed us." As vampires hurried to obey his orders, Victor gathered Selena and Liam close. "I should have seen this coming," he said quietly, his voice heavy with self-blame. "Victor," Selena said, touching his arm. "That man said I was marked for death." "What did he mean?" Victor's jaw tightened. "It means someone very powerful wants you dead. And they're willing to send enhanced human assassins to do it." He looked down at sleeping Liam, that strange tenderness crossing his features again. "But I swore to protect you both, and I always keep my promises." As they left the destroyed Great Hall, Selena couldn't shake the feeling that this attack was just the beginning. Someone in this castle wanted her dead, and they wouldn't stop trying until they succeeded. The question was, who could she trust when everyone around her was a predator? 2 nights after the assassin attack, Selena couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every creak of the ancient castle made her heart race. Liam slept peacefully in his crib, but she found herself checking on him every few minutes. Her motherly worry in overdrive. Victor had tripled the guards and personally questioned half the court. But no one had confessed to being the traitor. The investigation continued, and tension in the castle grew thicker by the hour. Unable to rest, Selena wrapped herself in the silk robe Victor had provided and stepped into the hallway. She needed air, space to think. The castle felt like a beautiful prison, and she was beginning to wonder if she'd traded one cage for another. She wandered through the hallways, marveling again at the ancient tapestries and oil paintings. Some showed Victor himself, younger somehow, though still clearly centuries old, standing beside other figures she didn't recognize. In one painting, he stood with his arm around a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, both of them smiling. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Selena spun around to find Victor approaching from a side passage. He moved with that supernatural silence that still unnerved her. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I couldn't sleep, and I was just looking, Isabel." Victor stepped up beside her, studying the painting with an expression of deep sadness. "My wife. Or rather, the woman who would have been my wife if fate hadn't gotten in the way." Wife. The word hit Selena like a physical blow. She'd suspected Victor had lost someone, but hearing it confirmed made something twist painfully in her chest. What happened to her? Victor was quiet for so long that Selena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She was killed 23 years ago by human rebels who raided our settlement." 23 years ago. The timing made Selena's blood run cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry for your loss." "She was carrying our child," Victor continued, his hand reaching out to almost touch the painted figure. "A daughter. I was going to ask the council to make Isabel immortal after the birth so we could be together forever." His laugh was bitter. "Instead, I buried them both." Selena's heart ached for him, but something nagged at her mind. Before she could ask more questions, Victor straightened and seemed to shake himself from his memories. "You should return to your room," he said gently. "It's not safe to wander alone at night." After he escorted her back, Selena lay awake staring at the ceiling. 23 years ago. Marcus had been part of a rebellion 23 years ago. He told her stories about his wild youth before they married, but surely it was a coincidence. There had been many rebellions over the years. The next evening, Selena's curiosity got the better of her. She needed to know more about Isabel, about Victor's past. Maybe understanding his pain would help her make sense of her own situation. She left Liam with Maria, one of the trusted human servants, and went exploring. Victor was meeting with his advisors in the war room, planning their next move against whoever was trying to kill her. This was her chance to find answers. She made her way toward the administrative wing of the castle, looking for Victor's private study. The hallways were dimly lit, and most of the court was elsewhere, making it easier to move unseen. That's when she heard Victor's voice coming from behind a partly open door. "Still can't believe it, my lord," an unfamiliar voice was saying. "After all these years to discover that Marcus Thorne was one of the rebels who..." "Yes, Dimitri." Victor's voice was heavy with exhaustion. "The irony isn't lost on me. The man whose wife and child I'm now protecting was part of the group that murdered Isabel." Selena's world tilted. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. "Marcus Thorne was the one who led them to our settlement," Victor continued. "He gave them the information about our defenses, our safe houses. He didn't know Isabel was there. She was supposed to be visiting her sister that week, but her sister fell ill, so she stayed home. And now his widow and son are under your protection," the other voice, Dimitri, said carefully. "Some might see this as poetic justice." "Some might," Victor agreed, and Selena couldn't read his tone. "But what purpose would revenge serve? Marcus is dead. Isabel is still gone. Hurting Selena and Liam won't bring her back." "But they could be useful in other ways," Dimitri suggested. "The woman is beautiful. And the child, well, a son to replace the daughter you lost." "Enough." Victor's voice turned sharp. "They are under my protection. That's all you need to know." "Of course, my lord. But the court talks. They wonder if your attachment to these humans is clouding your judgment. Lady Seraphine has been quite vocal about." "Seraphine can voice her concerns to my face if she wishes, as can anyone else who questions my decisions." There was a rustling of papers. Then Dimitri spoke again. "What will you do when the woman learns the truth about her husband's role in Lady Isabel's death?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "But I won't be the one to tell her. She's suffered enough." Selena backed away from the door on trembling legs, her mind reeling. Marcus had led the rebellion that killed Victor's pregnant wife. Victor knew this, had known it from the moment he saw her at the auction. Everything made sense now. The huge price he'd paid, the strange looks, the way he'd seemed to recognize her. She wasn't a rescue. She was a reminder, a living symbol of everything he'd lost. But was this protection or revenge? Victor's words suggested he genuinely cared for them. But how could she trust him knowing what she knew now? How could she stay here knowing that every time Victor looked at Liam, he might be thinking of his own dead daughter? Worse, what if he changed his mind? What if one day the pain of seeing them became too much and his desire for revenge overcame his protective instincts? Selena made it back to her room before the tears started. She sat beside Liam's crib, watching her innocent son sleep, and made a decision. They had to leave soon. Before Victor decided that protecting Marcus Thorne's family was a mistake he could no longer afford to make. But even as she began planning their escape, a traitorous part of her heart whispered that she might be wrong about Victor's reasons. The way he looked at Liam, the gentleness in his touch, the pain in his eyes when he spoke of Isabel, could that all be an act? She didn't know, and she couldn't risk Liam's life to find out. Tomorrow, she would start looking for a way out of Ravencroft Castle. Even if it killed her, she would not let her son pay for his father's sins. Selena barely had time to begin her escape plans before Lady Seraphine made her move. It happened during the emergency council meeting called to address the ongoing security threat. Victor had reluctantly agreed to let the Vampire Council meet at Ravencroft to discuss the assassin attack and the traitor in their midst. What he didn't expect was for Seraphine to turn the entire proceeding into a trial. Selena was feeding Liam in her room when urgent knocking interrupted her. Maria, the human servant, burst in with panic written across her face. My lady, you must come quickly, Maria gasped. They're demanding your presence in the Grand Council chamber. All of them. Who's demanding? Selena asked, but she already knew this couldn't be good. The entire Vampire Council. Lady Seraphine has made accusations. Selena's blood turned to ice. She quickly wrapped Liam in his blanket and followed Maria through hallways that seemed longer and more scary than ever before. When they reached the massive double doors of the council chamber, she could hear shouting from within. Harboring a spy, Seraphine's voice rang out clearly. A human traitor who has already brought death to our halls. The guards opened the doors and Selena found herself facing a nightmare. The Grand Council chamber was a circular room with tiered seating like an ancient Roman arena. 12 of the most powerful vampires in North America sat in their high-backed chairs, their red eyes glowing in the candlelight. At the center stood Victor, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. And there was Seraphine, elegant and deadly in a blood-red gown, holding what appeared to be documents in her manicured hands. Ah, here she is, Seraphine announced with false sweetness as Selena entered. The little human who has so thoroughly bewitched our alpha. Seraphine, enough, Victor warned, but his voice lacked its usual absolute authority. The council's presence had shifted the power balance. No, Victor, said an ancient vampire with pure white hair, whom Selena recognized as Elder Matthias, the most senior member of the council. Let Lady Seraphine present her evidence. Evidence. Selena's heart hammered against her ribs. Seraphine smiled victoriously. Esteemed council, I present proof that this human woman is not the innocent victim our alpha believes her to be. She held up the documents. Intelligence reports gathered from our contacts in the human settlements. Reports about her late husband, Marcus Thorne. Victor went very still. Where did you get those? Does it matter? Seraphine's eyes glittered with malice. What matters is what they reveal. Marcus Thorne wasn't just some random human killed in a raid. He was a leader in the Crimson Dawn Rebellion. The same rebellion that murdered dozens of our kind 23 years ago. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several council members leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Furthermore, Seraphine continued, these reports show that Marcus Thorne was specifically responsible for the intelligence that led rebels to attack our settlement in Wisconsin, the settlement where. She paused dramatically, where Lady Isabel Drawl was murdered. The silence that followed was deafening. Every vampire in the room turned to stare at Victor, whose face had gone completely expressionless. Is this true? Elder Matthias demanded. Victor's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. Yes. The council erupted. Voices rose in anger and accusation. Selena stood frozen, clutching Liam tighter as the full weight of the revelation hit the room. So you knew, Elder Matthias said when the noise died down. You knew this woman was the widow of the man who killed your mate. And you still brought her here. I brought her here because she and her child were in danger, Victor replied evenly. Danger from whom? Another council member demanded. From us? From justice? Seraphine seized the moment. This goes deeper than Victor's questionable judgment, she declared. I have evidence that Selena Thorne has been in contact with remaining members of the Crimson Dawn. The assassination attempt wasn't random. It was a failed rescue. They were trying to get their agent and her child out before we discovered the truth. That's a lie, Selena found her voice at last, stepping forward despite her terror. I've never contacted anyone. I didn't even know about my husband's past. How convenient, Seraphine sneered. The innocent widow who knows nothing. Tell me, human, did your husband never mention his glorious rebellion? Never tell you how many vampires he helped slaughter? Selena's mind raced back through her memories with Marcus. He'd been secretive about his past, yes. But she'd assumed it was just the usual reluctance to discuss the dark times before they met. He never told me details, she said honestly. Because he was protecting his mission, Seraphine shot back. Protecting his contact inside our own walls. What contact? Victor's voice was deadly quiet. Seraphine's smile was pure venom. Why, me, of course. Marcus Thorne was my informant all those years ago. I was the one who told him where to strike. The chamber exploded into chaos. Victor's roar of rage shook the very foundations of the castle. His eyes blazed red as his fangs extended fully. And for a moment, Selena thought he might actually kill Seraphine where she stood. You, he snarled, stalking toward her. You killed Isabel. I killed a threat, Seraphine replied coolly, though Selena could see her hands trembling. Isabel was making you weak, just like this human is doing now. The council needs a strong leader, not some lovesick fool playing house with mortals. And the assassination attempt? Elder Matthias demanded. My people, Seraphine admitted without shame. If Victor wouldn't see reason about the human, she needed to be removed. Though I must admit, I'm impressed she survived. Victor was advancing on Seraphine like death itself when Elder Matthias's voice cut through his rage. Enough. This changes nothing about the immediate threat. The human and her spawn must be eliminated. They know too much and their very existence destabilizes our alpha. No. Victor turned to face the council, placing himself protectively between them and Selena. They are under my protection. Your protection is revoked, Elder Matthias declared. By council authority, we demand they be handed over for immediate execution. The other council members nodded in agreement. Selena felt the world spinning around her as she realized they were about to die. All of Victor's protection, all his power, meant nothing if the council turned against him. No, Victor repeated, his voice carrying absolute finality. I am the Alpha, my word is law, and I say they live. Then you choose them over your own kind? Elder Matthias asked. Victor looked back at Selena, holding Liam close to her chest. In his storm blue eyes, she saw something that took her breath away, not vengeance or calculated protection, but genuine love. Love for her. Love for Liam. Love that had grown despite everything. Yes, he said simply. I choose them. Seraphine's face twisted with fury. You fool. They're using you. That child is mine, Victor finished quietly. By choice, by love, by the bonds that matter more than blood or species. He turned back to the council. If you want them, you'll have to go through me. The challenge hung in the air like a blade. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Victor Drawl was the most powerful vampire any of them had ever known. Even together, the outcome of a fight was far from certain, but more than that. Selena realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, an alpha vampire choosing love over power. Protection over revenge, hope over the pain of the past. So be it, Elder Matthias said finally. But know this, Victor Drawl. By protecting them, you risk everything, your position, your authority, perhaps your life. Victor's smile was sharp as his fangs. Some things are worth the risk. As the council members filed out in angry silence, Seraphine shot one last poisonous look at Selena. This isn't over, she hissed, but Selena barely heard her. She was staring at Victor, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a captor or a predator or even a protector, but as a man who had chosen love over everything else. The question was, would that choice be enough to save them all? The answer came at dawn. Selena woke to the sound of clashing steel and inhuman screams echoing through the castle hallways. She bolted upright in bed, immediately checking on Liam, who was crying in his crib, probably startled awake by the violence erupting around them. Victor burst through her door without knocking. His face grim and his clothes already splattered with blood. They're here, he said shortly. Seraphine has rallied half the council and their personal armies. This is a full coup. How many? Selena asked, lifting Liam from his crib and trying to calm him. Enough. Victor moved to the window and peered through the heavy curtains. She's brought Lord Ashford and his Blood Knights, Elder Matthias and his War Coven, plus at least 50 mercenary vampires. His jaw tightened. They're not just here to kill you anymore, Selena. They're here to take my throne. The castle shook as something massive struck the outer walls. In the distance, Selena could hear Seraphine's voice amplified by some supernatural means, calling for Victor's surrender. There's a hidden passage in the wine cellar, Victor said, turning back to her. Dimitri is waiting there with a car. He'll take you and Liam to the safe house in Canada. What about you? Victor's smile was sharp and deadly. I'm going to remind them why I'm the Alpha. He started toward the door, but Selena caught his arm. Victor, wait. He paused, looking down at her hand on his sleeve. Selena, there's no time. I know what Seraphine did, she said quietly. I know she killed Isabel. I know my husband was part of it, and I know you've been protecting us anyway. Victor's expression softened slightly. None of that was your fault. Maybe not, but running away while you fight for us. Selena shook her head firmly. That's not who I want to be anymore. I'm tired of being rescued. I want to fight. You're human. You'll die. I might die anyway. At least this way I'll die standing beside you. Victor stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his storm blue eyes, surprise, admiration, and something deeper. You're serious? Dead serious. Selena adjusted her hold on Liam. Where can I keep him safe while we fight? Victor's expression was torn between pride and terror. The panic room behind my study. It's warded against vampire magic and has enough supplies for days. Maria is already there. She'll watch him. Another explosion rocked the castle. Closer this time. Through the windows, Selena could see dark shapes climbing the outer walls like spiders. Time to go, Victor said. They raced through hallways filled with smoke and the sounds of battle. Victor's loyal guards were fighting desperately against Seraphine's forces, but they were outnumbered. Bodies, both friendly and enemy, littered the stone floors. They made it to Victor's study where Maria waited in the hidden panic room with tears streaming down her face. My lord. They've broken through the main hall, she reported. Selena kissed Liam's forehead and reluctantly handed him to Maria. Keep him safe, she whispered. No matter what happens. I will, my lady. I swear it. Victor sealed the panic room with a complex series of locks and magical wards. Even if they kill us both, they won't be able to get through that door for days, he assured Selena. Then he turned to a weapon cabinet and pulled out a sword with a silver blade. Can you use this? Selena hefted the weapon, testing its weight. Marcus taught me some basic sword fighting. Said it might come in handy in the settlements. Stay behind me. Don't try to be a hero. And if I fall, you won't fall, Selena said firmly. We're ending this together. 3 months after Seraphine's defeat, Ravencroft Castle had transformed from a fortress under siege into something Selena had never expected, a home. The reconstruction had been swift and thorough. The grand hall, once scarred by battle, now gleamed with polished marble and new tapestries showing scenes of cooperation between vampires and humans. The court had rallied around Victor with renewed loyalty, especially after he'd revealed the full extent of Seraphine's betrayals. Today marked a special occasion, the formal ceremony that would change everything. Selena stood before an ornate mirror in what had once been Seraphine's chambers, now transformed into her own suite. The irony wasn't lost on her. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that brought out her golden hair and fair skin, a crown of silver and sapphires resting on her brow. You look beautiful, my lady, Maria said, adjusting the train of the dress. Like a true queen. Queen. The word still felt unreal. In 3 months, she'd gone from auction property to the mate of the most powerful vampire in North America, but more than that, she'd found something she'd never expected after Marcus's death: love. Real, deep, life-changing love. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Victor entered looking magnificent in formal black attire with a silver cloak bearing the Drawl family crest. But Selena's attention was immediately drawn to the small bundle in his arms. Liam, now 6 months old and absolutely captivated by the shiny buttons on Victor's coat. How's our son? Selena asked, reaching for the baby. Curious about everything, Victor replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. Dimitri swears he tried to grab a vampire's fangs during the pre-ceremony reception. He's fearless. Selena laughed, taking Liam into her arms. Wonder where he gets that from. Victor's expression grew serious. Selena, before we do this officially, there's something I need to tell you about Marcus. She tensed slightly. They'd avoided talking about her late husband since Seraphine's revelations, but she knew this conversation was inevitable. My investigations revealed the truth, Victor continued. Marcus wasn't the mastermind behind the rebellion that killed Isabel. He was manipulated just like the others. Seraphine fed him false information, made him believe vampires were planning to slaughter entire human settlements. She used his protective instincts against him. Selena felt a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. So he wasn't, he was a good man trying to protect his people, Victor said firmly. Seraphine corrupted that goodness for her own purposes. Marcus died believing he was saving lives, not knowing he'd been played by the very monster he thought he was fighting. Tears pricked Selena's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For finding out the truth. For clearing his name. He was your first love and Liam's father, Victor replied gently. He deserves to be remembered for who he really was, not the lies Seraphine created. A commotion outside drew their attention to the windows. Below in the courtyard, hundreds of vampires and humans had gathered for the ceremony. Representatives from human settlements across the continent stood alongside vampire nobility, all here to witness something unprecedented. "Are you ready?" Victor asked, offering her his arm. Selena looked down at Liam, who gazed up at her with bright blue eyes so much like Victor's. Then at the man who had become her heart, her protector, her partner in every way that mattered. "I'm ready." The ceremony was magnificent. Elder Matthias, now Victor's loyal supporter, led the service as Victor formally declared Selena his mate and queen. The crowd cheered as he placed a second crown, this one representing her role as bridge between species, on her head, but the moment that truly mattered came next. "I also present Prince Liam Drawthorn," Victor announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Heir to both vampire and human legacies, symbol of the unity we seek to build." He lifted Liam high, and the baby, completely unafraid of the crowd or the ceremony, actually giggled. The sound carried in the evening air, and Selena saw more than one hardened vampire smile at the pure joy of it. Later, after the festivities had died down and their guests had departed, the three of them sat in Victor's private study. A fire crackled on the hearth, and for the first time in months, everything felt peaceful. Liam had fallen asleep in Victor's arms, completely comfortable with the vampire who'd become his father in every way that mattered. Victor held him with the careful tenderness of someone who understood exactly how precious this small life was. "Do you ever regret it?" Selena asked quietly. "Everything you gave up for us?" Victor looked at her with those storm blue eyes that had once seemed so cold and now held nothing but warmth. "You still don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" "I didn't buy you at that auction to own you, Selena. I saved you because I recognized something I thought I'd lost forever, the chance to have a family again. Not to replace what I'd lost, but to build something new, something better." He shifted Liam slightly, brushing a gentle finger across the baby's cheek. "When I saw you protecting him, fighting for him despite your terror, I saw the same fierce love Isabel would have had for our daughter. I saw hope." Selena felt tears spill down her cheeks. "And now," Victor's voice was soft but certain, "now I have everything I never dared dream of again. A mate who chose to fight beside me. A son who will grow up in a world where vampires and humans can coexist. A future worth building." He looked down at sleeping Liam, his expression infinitely tender. "You will never be auctioned, little one," he whispered. "Never be hunted. Never be afraid. You are mine and I am yours. We are family, and family protects each other." As if responding to Victor's words, Liam's tiny hand curled around the vampire's finger. Selena leaned against Victor's shoulder, watching her son sleep peacefully in the arms of the man who'd saved them both. Not just from death, but from a life without love, without hope, without the family they'd all thought was lost forever. Outside, the night was peaceful. Inside Ravencroft Castle, a new dynasty had begun. One built not on fear or power, but on love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Victor's smile was fierce and proud. Together, they made their way toward the grand hall, where the sounds of battle were loudest. The hallways were chaos. Loyal vampires fighting desperately against Seraphine's forces. Ancient tapestries burning. Priceless artifacts smashed underfoot. They emerged into the grand hall to find a scene from a nightmare. Seraphine stood in the center of the room, her red gown now torn and bloody, her platinum hair wild around her face. She was surrounded by a dozen of her strongest supporters, while Victor's remaining loyal guards formed a defensive circle near the entrance. "Victor," Seraphine called out when she saw them. "How noble of you to come die for your pets." "The only one dying tonight is you," Victor replied, his voice carrying across the hall with supernatural force. "Such arrogance." Seraphine gestured to her supporters. "Kill the human first. Make him watch." 3 vampires broke from her group, moving with inhuman speed towards Selena. But Victor was faster. He stopped the first one, his claws ripping through the vampire's throat in a spray of black blood. The second attacker met Victor's boot to the chest, sending him flying across the room to crash into a stone pillar. The third got past Victor's guard and lunged at Selena with fangs extended. She brought her sword up instinctively, and the blade caught him in the chest. The silver burned through his heart like acid, and he crumbled to dust with a shriek of agony. "Impressive," Seraphine sneered. "But you can't kill us all." "Watch me," Selena shot back, surprising herself with her own venom. the battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. Victor moved like a force of nature, cutting through Seraphine's supporters with centuries of lethal skill. But they kept coming, and even his supernatural strength had limits. Selena fought beside him, her sword flashing silver in the firelight. She wasn't as fast or strong as the vampires, but she was determined and unpredictable. More than once, her unexpected attacks saved Victor from a killing blow. Finally, only Seraphine remained. She and Victor faced each other in the center of the ruined hall, both bloodied but far from beaten. The air between them crackled with supernatural energy. "It didn't have to end this way," Seraphine said, circling him like a predator. "You could have been the greatest alpha in vampire history. Instead, you chose weakness." "I chose love," Victor replied, "something you'll never understand." "Love?" Seraphine laughed bitterly. "You think that human loves you? She's terrified of you. She was planning to run away with her bastard child." Victor's eyes flicked to Selena, who stood with her sword ready, breathing hard but unbroken. "Is that true?" Selena met his gaze without flinching. "I was scared," she admitted. "But I'm not running anymore." Seraphine snarled in fury and launched herself at Victor with inhuman speed, her claws extended like razors. They collided in the center of the hall, moving too fast for human eyes to follow. The duel that followed was like watching gods of war. They crashed through furniture, shattered stone pillars, and left gouges in the ancient walls. Both were masters of combat, both driven by centuries of power and pride, but Victor had something Seraphine didn't, something to fight for beyond himself. In the end, it was Selena who created the opening. As Victor and Seraphine grappled near the great fireplace, she saw her chance. She hurled her silver sword with all her strength, the blade spinning through the air to embed itself in Seraphine's shoulder. The silver burned, making Seraphine scream and loosen her grip on Victor. It was all the advantage he needed. Victor's hand shot out, grasping a broken wooden stake from the ruined furniture. With supernatural speed and strength, he drove it through Seraphine's heart. "This is for Isabel," he said quietly. "And for every life you've destroyed." Seraphine's eyes went wide with shock and pain. She opened her mouth to speak, but only blood came out. Then she crumbled to dust, leaving nothing but her torn red gown and the echo of her final scream. Silence fell over the grand hall. The remaining council members and surviving guards slowly emerged from their hiding places, their faces filled with awe and fear. Elder Matthias was the first to kneel. "Long live the Alpha," he said, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the hall. One by one, every vampire in the room followed suit, bowing before Victor's unquestioned dominance. Victor stood in the center of it all, bloodied but victorious, and looked only at Selena. "It's over," he said simply, but Selena knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. They had won the right to choose their own destiny, to build something new from the ashes of the old, together.